Okay, hello there. I'm about to read the chapter of By the Book, and we are at
And by the book was
written by myself and uh,
Mishell Baker.
Michelle. Yeah, I could all of a sudden all I could
You
think
don't remember the real name.
I could only remember her real name, and it's going no, that's not the right name. Mishell Baker. Yes. Okay. This is chapter 12. Alarms and Excursions. Falcon was already pacing at the west gate when Otto arrived to open it at first light. The air, smelling of snow, stung Falcon's nose, and the sky was a cold, desolate gray. It was not the sort of morning to be wandering the valley, but Falcon knew in his heart that his brother had to be still alive. Dismayed by the sheer expanse of farmland and forest he would have to cover, Falcon headed down the west road. By most people's standards, Sigburg was a small village and a small valley, but it was a huge place to search for someone when you didn't know where to start. The woods seemed more likely than the farmlands, however. Falcon paused a moment, trying to decide whether to turn north or to cross the farmland to search in the southern forest. He took a deep breath, looking up blankly at the sky. Before Falcon even realized it, he found himself turning left and crossing the fallow fields, heading toward the woods to the south. It was a strange way to make a decision, but he didn't have Al's gift for planning, and sometimes he found that things worked out better if he didn't think at all. As he ventured into the southern forest, a low fog seemed to gather around him. A brisk wind sent branches hissing and thrashing together against the leaden sky. In the distance, the cry of a dire wolf soared high and eerie over the wind. Falcon shivered, remembering the dark stains of the wolf blood he'd seen on his brother's clothes. Gradually, Falcon became lost in the eerie landscape of mists and shadows, where it was impossible to judge direction or time. He called his brother's voice over and over, his throat becoming hoarse from the effort. He realized with a qualm that, given the fog, he could be standing 10 feet away from Hawk and still not see him. After what seemed like hours, the wind gradually abated. The mist continued to thicken, however, and it became more difficult to figure out where he was or in which direction he was going. Half blinded, Falcon tripped on a bramble bush and fell to his knees, his woolen trousers snagged in thorns. He struggled away from the entanglement and pulled himself up by the branches of a fir tree, hardly feeling the sting of the needles against his palms. "Hawk!" he called again. His voice gave out at last, trailing off into a painful whisper. "Please hear me!" He slumped against the tree, a sudden heaviness in his chest. Falcon sensed a movement nearby and turned quickly. Through the murk, a pale form approached. With a chill of panic, Falcon remembered hearing rumors of ghosts in Sigburg. But he wasn't near the graveyard, was he? He held his breath, unable to move. When the pale form was less than 10 feet away, Falcon's taut muscles suddenly became lax with awe. He could see it now, a white stag, its silvered antlers broader than Falcon's arm span. The creature's dark eyes looked directly into his, and Falcon could do nothing but look back in wonder. They stared at each other in the silent fog until Falcon remembered to breathe again. Then the animal turned and began to stride away into the trees. Falcon felt a sharp stab of loss. "Wait!" he tried to call out. The word was little more than a hoarse croak, and the creature didn't turn back. Instinctively, Falcon followed. The stag at once began to bound, zigzagging through the trees, and Falcon broke into a run to keep up. With a thrill of amazement, Falcon realized that the creature's hooves were as silent on the brush-strewn ground as mist on snow. This was no mere animal, but all the same, Falcon sensed that he had no reason to fear. Gradually, the stag seemed to be fading into the mist. Falcon forced his body through a final burst of speed, not wanting to lose sight of the miraculous creature. Suddenly the fog and forest ended, and Falcon dashed into a clearing. He stopped abruptly, almost falling over in surprise at the flood of color and beauty. The ground was awash in warm pastel hues, and Falcon's lungs filled with a fragrance so delicate and sweet it made his heart ache. A huge tree spread its shimmering branches majestically against the darkened sky. Its thick roots cradled a group of rocks, from which poured a rainbow cascade of water. As Falcon stood taking in this sight, he felt a strange warmth that melted away his fear and confusion. The meadows seemed almost to embrace him, to recognize him as a treasured friend. A sudden peal of happiness rang through him so sweetly that it almost hurt. Where else could he be but Arana's peace? A noise, perhaps a sigh, gently pulled Hawk from his dream. Slowly he surfaced from the warm, deep slumber that had blanketed him in the gray mist, and what? His dream slipped from him as he slowly became aware of his surroundings. Inhaling the perfumed air, he stretched and sat up. Then, for what might have been minutes or years, he simply sat and stared at the beautiful garden around him. Where was he? Was this the afterlife? And if so, why was his twin brother standing right in the middle of it with his mouth ajar? As the last shreds of sleep lifted from his mind, Hawk knew without a doubt that he was still awake and alive and no longer lost. Falcon had found him. The relief was so intense that for a moment Hawk couldn't move. Then he stumbled towards his brother and crushed him in a sudden, fierce hug. Falcon went stiff with shock for a moment, then returned the embrace. "You're safe," he said in a hoarse whisper. "I knew you'd be safe." Hawk pulled back with a vehement shake of his head. "No," he said somberly, "I wasn't. I tried to fight this—" He stopped, looked down at himself. But I'm not hurt. Did I dream it?" He could see that his clothes were dark and stiff with dried blood, but when he touched his hand to the back of his head, he felt no wound. "I'm all right," he said in disbelief. "What happened to you?" Falcon said, his eyes wide. Hawk tried to remember. His stomach churned as the details began to come back to him. "There was this goon," he said tightly, "outside the cave where the kobold lives. Bigger than Otto." "You fought a goon?" Falcon said, turning pale. "It broke my arm. I remember feeling it break. I had to run. I don't really remember how I got here." Hawk took a deep breath. "But I had this dream last night, Falcon. It was so strange. Do you believe that dreams can mean something?" "I don't know. Oh, Hawk, I should have been with you." Falcon looked miserable. Hawk shook his head. "You just have been killed too. That thing was horrible." He shuddered. "I have to get back to the Shearmeister, Falcon, and learn how to defend myself. Wolfgang was right. I can't keep counting on luck." Falcon nodded fiercely. "Fine, and we can practice more if you want. How did you find this place? Did you follow the white stag too?" "I must have been delirious," Hawk said as his mind gasped vainly at the thin air. "I just remember running, and the next thing I remember is a dream. There was a beautiful woman and a man with a wolf's head. He carried away on a gray horse. She needed my help, and I couldn't do anything." A little line appeared between Falcon's brows. That's a strange sort of dream. Yeah, that'll help. I've never had anything like that. Normally I just dream about fighting monsters or being naked in public. This one seemed like it had symbols and stuff. Falcon tilted his head as though considering. Maybe there's something about this place that affects your dreams. And I just stood there, Hawk went on. I wasn't doing anything to help her. I don't know if this is what the dream is trying to tell me. Hawk! Falcon! Called a voice from behind them. What are you doing here? Owl stood at the scene in dismay. His two oafish brothers stood right in the middle of one of the most magical places in the known world, looking as comfortable as if they, and not he, had discovered it. Falcon's face lit with a smile of genuine delight when he noticed Owl. "This is Arana's piece, isn't it?" he said. "Yes," said Owl shortly, but even as he spoke he felt himself calming. It seemed impossible to get angry in this place. "You two don't belong here," he continued matter-of-factly. "It's a very powerful nexus of magic." "I'll say," Hawk observed as he flexed his right elbow, "it unbroke my arm last night." "I don't think you should be here," said Owl, still irritated as he made his way over to the central tree. He had come here to explore the way Arana's magic affected his book, and Hawk and Falcon would only get in the way. "Why shouldn't we be here?" asked Falcon. "Whoever Arana was, I don't think she intended for this place to be seen." I think she intended this place to be seen." Al just frowned. "You don't know the first thing about Arana. But more importantly, you don't know what magic this powerful could do to those that are not attuned to its energies." Hawk held up his right hand again. "Well, here's an example. I'm not too worried about it." Owl opened his book, ignoring Hawk. When he saw the pages, it was all he could do not to smile with satisfaction. The runes were back, revealed by the magical light of the tree, and the strange behavior of the book was a way of explaining what each rune meant. The very first rune had something to do with the wind that blew from the page. No, not just wind. The entire concept of air. He knew it because the moment he gazed at the rune and mentally tested the meaning, he felt it deep in his bones. Truly new. "If there's magic here," Hawk went on, "it's good magic." "You don't understand anything about magic," Owl said to Hawk, closing his book to look at the gold symbol on the cover. It was an eye with a serpentine line crossing through it. He'd seen that eye symbol before. Where was it? Flipping through the pages, he found it. As the rune began to glow, he understood. The awakening of the eye to perceive. "Oh, and you know all about magic then," countered Hawk scornfully. Owl looked up then, irritated. "As it happens, I'm going to be trained as a spellcaster. Wren knows. Falcon knows." Hawk looked suddenly caught off guard. He glanced at Falcon as though for confirmation, but Falcon now stood with his head tipped forward, eyes closed, palms turned downward. He wore a slight smile on his face. With a baffled shake of his head, Hawk turned again to Owl. "You're no spellcaster," he said. Suddenly, Owl realized something. He shut the book again, looked at the gold symbol on the cover. Instantly, he knew what it was. A rune spell. 2 runes. The I and the S curve. Perceive spell. Hawk, clearly bothered by Owl's lack of response to his taunts, made exaggerated gestures of mystery, Look at me, I'm all amazing and powerful owl. Owl looked up, concentrating, trying to carry the image of that rune spell away from the book with his eyes. He felt a surge of energy, he not only felt, but saw the intense magic pervading the area. To his surprise, the rock on the top of the spring, the very one he'd been standing on the day before, began to shimmer with an aura of incandescent light. All must tremble before me, Hawk began to chant melodramatically, for I am the great. I am the great. He broke off, obviously annoyed. What are you staring at? Apparently, he couldn't see what Owl was seeing. Owl just circled the rock, gazing at it intently. There was magic here, tangible magic, a spell. But what? He visualized the new rune spell again, focusing this time specifically on the rock. He felt the still strange sensation of his own magic releasing. As it did so, he was overwhelmed by the feeling that this rock was not a rock, but a door. He checked a sudden urge to laugh. This is almost too easy. He stood back from the rock and stretched out his hand, mostly for effect. He mentally called up the image of the open rune spell that he'd learned from Zara, and after a moment's concentration, the rock obediently lifted and turned over, revealing a hidden hinge. Hawk gaped. What the? Even Falcon seemed to come out of his daze. Did you do that, Al? Al continued to ignore them, moving to peer under the rock. Underneath it was just a flat stone surface with an intricate symbol chiseled into it. Hawk stammered. He just pointed at the rock and it moved. Wren said he could do magic, Falcon said. Do you believe even half of what Wren says? Fox. Al corrected them softly, running his fingers over the carving. There in the center of the design was a backwards S. This was clearly another rune spell, but he didn't know the rune or the runes that made up the rest of it. Opening the book again, Al flipped through the pages. He could easily see the runes while under the tree, but none of them matched the one under Arana's rock. You can really do magic, Hawk said, sounding stunned. I know 2 spells, Al clarified. One to let me see that there was a spell on the rock. The second one let me open it. And there's a third inscribed right underneath it. If you were quiet for a moment, I might be able to learn it. To Al's intense annoyance, Hawk approached nearer to look at it. That squiggly thing is a spell? It's called a rune spell, Al said. You have to have innate magic and know the runes to make it work. See this curvy line here in the middle? It's the rune for spell. He couldn't help but feel a thrill of superiority as his 2 brothers stared at the rune, completely baffled. To cast a spell, you must understand the meaning of all the component runes and visualize the entire design in your mind. Sounds hard, said Hawk. Al nodded. That's why I have to get training. There's supposed to be an archmage in this area named Erasmus. I imagine he can teach me war runes and help me train my inner eye. There was a brief, blessed silence, which Al used to concentrate on the mysterious rune spell. This spell had to be the source of the peaceful feeling that pervaded the meadow. Inscribed permanently on the rock, as it was, it would likely last for thousands of years. Apparently, Arana was willing to share this spell with anyone who possessed enough magical ability to find it. Al tried to mentally block out the familiar rune at the center of the figure and concentrate on what was left. The remaining figure was somewhat complex, along the lines of the awe spell rather than the simple symbols for open and perceive. However, Al decided it wasn't quite complicated enough to represent more than one rune. He knew what the spell did, so the remaining rune had to somehow represent the feeling that the spell evoked. Calm. Al felt a glorious sense of satisfaction as the concept of calm and all its associations resonated within him. Now that he knew the rune, it only took another moment to learn the spell, even though the shock of energy left him briefly winded. He had just learned 2 spells in a matter of minutes, all on his own. He could hardly imagine what he would learn with the help of an archmage. "Does Erasmus live in town?" Falcon said, breaking the silence. "According to Zara," said Al, "he lives on a nearby mountain called Zauberberg." "I don't think you can go exploring out there," said Falcon. "Hawk can tell you from experience that there are some very dangerous monsters in the woods." "I have just learned a new spell," Al said confidently. "I believe it will calm monsters, keep them from attacking. It's the same spell that makes that this meadow casts on you. Could you attack something right now if I asked you to?" Hawk stood there looking dumbstruck. Obviously the idea of being unable to attack didn't sit well with him. "Are you sure you can make it work?" he asked. Al wasn't, but he didn't like thinking along those lines. "I'll have to practice a bit first," he said, trying to sound more sure than he felt. "Just like everything else." "All right," said Hawk, turning to Falcon with a tone of finality. "Surely even you can see that we all have to stay here. Al has to learn magic, obviously. I need you to help me practice sword fighting, and Wren certainly can't go back by herself." After a moment, Falcon reluctantly nodded. "Speaking of Wren, Fox," Al corrected again. "Fox must be worried sick," Falcon continued. "We need to get back to her, or him." Hawk looked thoughtful for a moment. "Hey, Al, can you calm a goon?" Al felt the blood drain from his face. I wouldn't want to try it at this point," he said as evenly as he could manage. "Oh, all right," said Hawk with a shrug. "Let's go back. I'll figure out something. Al, maybe you can help me make a plan." Al blinked in surprise. Hawk had never voluntarily asked for his help before. "All right," he said, trying not to seem too pleased. "Let's go back to Wren," insisted Falcon. "Fox," corrected Hawk and Owl in one breath. It was a gloomy day, no doubt about it, but Wren was just as happy to be outside the town walls. She'd have to hurry so that her brothers didn't find out that she'd gone. Hilda's house was just where she said it would be, situated off of one of the more well-tended plots of farmland south of town. Wren found Heinrich Ferdinand standing in the middle of his chicken yard scattering feed. He was big and dark, with a reddish-brown hide, a well-trimmed black beard, and a long black tail that lashed out every so often to kill a fly. He had a bow slung over his shoulder, and Wren smiled when he saw the yellow fletching of his arrows in the quiver. Yellow was her favorite color. As she approached, the big centaur turned, his large pointed ears twitching at the sound of her footfalls. "Hi," she said to him with a wave of a greeting. "I'm Fox, Hilda's friend. Are you her father?" The centaur stood for a moment as though he didn't intend to reply. Chickens raced around beneath his feet, pecking frantically at their meager fare. "I am," he finally admitted. "What is it you want?" Wren started to frown at his abruptness, but she was in too good of a mood. Her smile crept back instantly. "Wren sent me here to ask if she could close up the stand a little early today. Business has been really slow this morning." "Business has been slow for years," said Heinrich dourly. "Tell her the answer is no, as always." "Why?" asked Wren bluntly. She hated cross, stubborn people. Hawk Hawk was stubborn, but at least he was nice to her most of the time. What's the point of her standing around all day if no one's going to buy anything? Heinrich frowned. My daughter has lost the privilege of going around unsupervised, he said coldly. Why? The last time she went anywhere by herself, she lost an entire week's profits and was merely killed in the process. Was it brigands? Wren asked in amazement. Of course not, snapped Heinrich. What kind of father would let his daughter wander alone in these woods? She was in town, where I thought she would be safe. The kobold. No, it was not the damnable kobold either. As Heinrich spoke, Wren caught a slight movement behind him, and her eye was drawn to it. Advancing stealthily upwind of the chicken yard was a large red fox. It had to be the same one that she'd seen along the western road her first day. She'd know it anywhere. Thrilled, she almost cried out a greeting. But then she glanced at Heinrich's quiver of yellow-fletched arrows, and she changed her mind. Well, she said, prodding the centaur, what happened? I sent her to the bank with 4 months' profits, Heinrich said, and she allowed a young man to lure her into an alley near the seedy tavern in the Goose Quarter. He stole everything she carried. We had to sell all but 4 of our laying hens just to make ends meet. Apparently they'd recovered a bit since then. Wren counted the chickens that now squabbled and clucked at Heinrich's feet. 15. The fox probably wanted to make it 14. Should she say something? She decided she would, if Heinrich decided to be nice. Well, she's not going to let that happen again, said Wren, trying not to appear distracted. She's learned her lesson, so why can't she have a little time off? Because I am her father, and I say so, said Heinrich in a tone Wren had heard both Hawk and Owl use. It is time that you let me get back to my work. As he started to turn, Wren saw the fox freeze. It looked right at her, as if entreating her for help. That's not a reason, Wren said sharply, making the centaur turn back to her. You're just afraid to admit that Hilda's all grown up and that you'll lose the farm. You're just being selfish. Heinrich scowled in a way that would have been kind of scary if Wren wasn't having so much fun. Who are you to make such accusations, boy? He said furiously. Do not think I am ignorant of what you have in mind. Hilda is only 14 years old. I will not have her off courting some human when she could be earning what scant living we make in this town. The fox crept very close, and Wren dared a glance at it. To her amazement, it winked at her. Keeping her in town isn't going to keep people from courting her, said Wren, dragging her eyes back to Heinrich. In fact, I've noticed that my older brothers seem to hang around a lot at her stand, too. She thinks they're cute. Heinrich's face turned an interesting shade of purple. If I were to let my daughter court anyone, it would be a nice young centaur from the neighboring town. Not your lecherous older brothers, and certainly not you. Anyone who calls himself fox is not to be trusted. Even as Heinrich spoke, the fox seized the nearest hen, a plump brown one. He moved so quickly and fiercely that his prey didn't even squawk. The other chickens continued to peck at their feet, undisturbed. Pretty slick, this fox. My brothers aren't lecherous, said Wren, wondering exactly what that word meant. They're nice. Nice or not, they are to have nothing further to do with my daughter. As Wren watched, the fox disappeared, then came back with its mouth empty and grabbed yet another hen. The fox shot her a last grateful look and bounded away. She thought she saw a second flash of movement, a small golden something in the shadows, but she wasn't certain. You can't tell your daughter who she can and can't be friends with, Wren observed, turning her eyes back to the angry centaur in front of her. "Be gone," Heinrich snapped. "Okay," said Wren amiably. "But if you don't ever let your Hilda have any fun, she's going to grow up to be just like you. Cranky and selfish and boring." "I said be gone," roared Heinrich. She could almost see steam pouring from his ears. "Nice to meet you," said Wren cheerfully, and she turned to head back to town. When Hawk returned to the inn, the sun was high in the sky. Shameen was already at the door, looking as though he had been hovering by the window most of the day. "Where's Wren?" Hawk asked, looking around in alarm. "Wren?" Shameen asked with confusion. I was told to say that there is no person here by that name. Fox said that he was going to visit a friend." "Fox doesn't have any friends," Hawk said in confusion. "And I don't like coming home and finding her missing." "She's always missing," commented Owl. "We never knew where Wren was in Alpendorf, and we'll never know where Fox is in Siegburg." "This isn't Alpendorf," said Hawk, beginning to pace. "People disappear around here, and there's an evil kobold wandering around. Someone has to control the little scamp, and it's not going to be me. I have too many things on my plate already." "More important things than looking out for your family?" said Falcon, his eyes reproachful. "Yes," blurted Hawk. "For heaven's sake, I can't even fight a goon. How am I ever going to earn money if I'm too busy being a babysitter to get any sword lessons?" "Hawk, think," said Owl. "Fox probably just went off to visit Hilda at the produce stand." "Maybe we should check," said Falcon. "But first we should pay Shameen for our rooms." The Cata had stood patiently during the entire exchange without so much as a tail twitch. Hawk sighed and counted out the coins. It wasn't Shameen's fault, really. He was being paid to feed them and shelter them, not to keep Wren out of trouble. No amount of money in the world could keep Wren out of trouble. Owl cleared his throat. "I think..." But Hawk wasn't going to find out what Owl thought, because something suddenly fell down the chimney and shattered in the fireplace, splashing a black, oil-like substance into the room. Shameen cried out something unintelligible and leaped on to the nearest table. "What the..." Hawk started. Two more glass containers dropped down and shattered, spilling the dark oil over the aged hardwood floor. Slowly, the flames from the fireplace began to burn the oil, turning an eerie, livid shade as it grew to twice its original height. "Someone smother the fire!" cried Owl. "Quickly!" Hawk raced forward, but as he did so, a glowing orb of flame came hissing down the chimney. It exploded where it contacted the oil. Flames leapt out of the fireplace, across the hearth, and onto the intricately woven rug that covered most of the floor. Shameen let out a yowl and, to Hawk's amazement, began to climb straight up the opposite wall. At his cry, Shima came in from the kitchen. She took one look, gasped, and ran back in. "Water!" cried Owl. "Fetch some water!" "In what, a teapot?" said Hawk, even as Falcon bolted into the kitchen. "We need to get everyone out of here, that's what. This place is a tinderbox." He dashed to the front door, only to find that it wouldn't budge. He rattled it, kicked it. It was stuck fast. Suddenly he felt like he had swallowed a handful of ice. He turned back and saw by the horror in Owl's eyes that he was thinking the same thing. "The kobold," he said. "It's trapped us." And that is the end of the chapter.
Ooh, cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger. That was chapter 12.